The silence stretched across the compound like a funeral shroud. 23 hardened Delta Force operators, men who had survived Fallujah, Helmand Province, and operations, so classified their own mothers would never know their names, stood frozen in perfect stillness. Their eyes were locked on a figure crouched behind a Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle, the weapon's massive frame dwarfing her compact build. The betting pool had started as a joke 3 hours earlier. $1,000 that the new transfer couldn't even properly shoulder the 50 caliber beast without being knocked flat on her back. Now, as the crosshairs settled on a birthday candle flickering 2,575 meters away across the Nevada desert, nobody was laughing. The candle sat atop a combat helmet positioned on a makeshift table, its flame dancing in the thermal updrafts of the scorching afternoon sun. Wind meters showed gusts varying between 8 and 12 miles per hour, shifting directions every 30 seconds. The target represented an impossible shot, not just because of the distance, but because of what it symbolized. Extinguishing a flame without disturbing the wax beneath required surgical precision that defied the laws of ballistics. Staff Sergeant Zara Ghost Volkov adjusted her cheek weld against the rifle stock, her breathing slowing to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. The call sign had followed her through 3 combat deployments, earned not through any supernatural ability, but through her uncanny talent for appearing exactly where the enemy least expected and disappearing before they could react. Her grandfather's sniper rifle from Stalingrad hung above her bunk, a reminder that precision shooting ran in her blood like a genetic code written in gunpowder and determination. "Winds picking up from the southwest," whispered Master Sergeant Rico Martinez, the unit's senior sniper instructor, though his voice carried the uncertainty of a man witnessing something beyond his comprehension. "Temperatures rising. Mirage is going to play hell with your scope picture." Zara's finger hovered over the trigger, her world narrowing to the space between heartbeats. The desert heat created shimmering waves that turned the distant target into a dancing phantom. Mathematics flooded her mind: bullet drop compensation, windage adjustments, the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation. But beneath the technical calculations lay something deeper, something that couldn't be taught in any sniper school or tactical manual. The betting had been Lieutenant Colonel James Reaper Morrison's idea, a grizzled veteran who'd commanded special operations teams across 4 continents. He'd watched her walk into the briefing room that morning, nodding the way conversation stopped mid-sentence, how chairs scraped against concrete as men unconsciously straightened their postures. In 27 years of military service, Morrison had developed an eye for soldiers who carried secrets in their silence. Zara Volkov was a puzzle wrapped in camouflage, and Morrison intended to solve her. The radio crackled to life, breaking the desert's cathedral silence. "Ghost, this is Overwatch. You have clear range conditions. Target is painted and confirmed. The shot is yours when ready." The voice belonged to Captain Marcus Eagle Eye Thompson, positioned in the observation tower with high-powered spotting scopes. Even he, a veteran of over 300 confirmed kills, had never attempted anything approaching this level of precision. Zara's response came as barely a whisper, her voice carrying the steady confidence of someone who had stared death in the face and found it lacking. "Overwatch, Ghost. Confirming wind hold, 2.3 mils left. Elevation set for extreme range. I have positive identification on target. Stand by." The Barrett's weight pressed against her collarbone like an old friend returning from a long journey. 54 pounds of precision-engineered destruction, capable of punching through armor plating at over a mile. The rifle had been designed to disable vehicles and eliminate high-value targets from impossible distances. Using it to extinguish a candle was like employing a sledgehammer to perform brain surgery, technically possible, but requiring a level of skill that bordered on the supernatural. Behind her, the Delta Force operators maintained their positions, but their skepticism had transformed into something approaching reverence. Sergeant First Class David Bulldog Chen, A man who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome through sheer force of will, found himself holding his breath. Staff Sergeant Maria Viper Rodriguez, the unit's explosives expert, watched through binoculars with the intensity of a scholar studying ancient texts. The wind shifted again, and Zara made a microscopic adjustment to her scope. Her movements were fluid, economical, each micro-adjustment reflecting thousands of hours spent perfecting her craft in conditions ranging from Arctic tundra to desert sandstorms. The rifle became an extension of her will. Its mechanical precision merged with her biological instincts until the boundary between human and weapon dissolved entirely. "Jesus Christ," muttered Private First Class Tommy Rabbit O'Brien, the unit's youngest member, barely 22 years old and still convinced that courage could overcome any obstacle. "She's actually going to try it." Martinez silenced him with a look that could have stopped incoming artillery. In the world of precision shooting, concentration was sacred, and distraction was the enemy of accuracy. He had trained hundreds of snipers during his career, watched them grow from nervous recruits into lethal instruments of military precision. But Zara Volkov operated on a different level entirely, in a realm where physics bent to accommodate human will. The candle flickered again, its flame bending in the shifting wind currents. At 2,575 meters, it appeared as little more than a pinprick of light dancing against the desert backdrop. The human eye could barely distinguish it from the heat mirages rising from the sand. Yet through her scope, Zara could see every detail: the way the wax had begun to pool around the base, how the wick had started to mushroom from prolonged burning. Her grandfather had taught her that patience was a sniper's greatest weapon, more valuable than the finest rifle or the most expensive ammunition. Anatoly Volkov had waited 72 hours in a bombed-out building in Stalingrad, surviving on melted snow and raw determination, until the perfect shot presented itself. The Nazi officer had never known what killed him, the bullet arriving seconds before the sound of the gunshot. "Ghost, be advised, you have aircraft inbound from the northeast. Military transport, probably routine supply run, but it's going to affect wind patterns in approximately 90 seconds." Zara acknowledged the information with a subtle nod. The C-130 Hercules would create downdrafts and turbulence that would make the shot exponentially more difficult. She had a narrow window of opportunity, measured in heartbeats and the steady rhythm of her breathing. The mathematics of ballistics demanded perfection, but perfection was a moving target in a world governed by chaos and probability. The rifle's trigger had been modified to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure, clean and predictable like the closing of a door. Zara's index finger rested against the curved metal, feeling the mechanism's precise engineering through the nerve endings in her fingertip. 23 seasoned warriors watched in absolute silence as she prepared to attempt the impossible. The C-130's engines grew louder, their drone beginning to interfere with the desert's natural acoustics. Sound waves bounced off canyon walls and rock formations, creating an audio landscape that would challenge even the most experienced marksman. But Zara had learned to shoot in conditions where silence was a luxury and concealment meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her breathing slowed to match the rhythm of her pulse, each inhalation bringing oxygen to muscles already saturated with adrenaline. The scope's reticle settled on the candle flame with mechanical precision, crosshairs bisecting the target in perfect alignment. Distance, wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, every variable had been calculated and compensated for. Now came the moment where science yielded to intuition, where training merged with instinct in the space between thought and action. "Wind's dropping," Martinez whispered, his voice barely audible above the approaching aircraft. "You've got maybe 30 seconds of stable conditions." The desert held its breath. Even the insects seemed to pause their endless chirping, as if nature itself recognized the gravity of the moment. Zara's world contracted to encompass only the reticle, the target, and the imperceptible pressure of her finger against the trigger. Everything else, the heat, the observers, the approaching aircraft, faded into background noise. Her grandfather's voice echoed across the decades, speaking words he had whispered during long nights in the forests outside Leningrad. The rifle does not make the shot, little wolf. The rifle is merely the instrument through which will becomes reality. Trust your training, but more importantly, trust yourself. The trigger broke with crystalline clarity. The Barrett's muzzle blast erupted like controlled thunder, sending a shockwave across the desert floor that kicked up clouds of sand and debris. The rifle's massive recoil drove back against Zara's shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer, but her position remained rock-steady, her grip unwavering. The sound rolled across the compound like an avalanche, echoing off distant mountains before fading into silence. For a moment that stretched into eternity, time seemed suspended. The bullet traveled at 2,910 feet per second, covering the distance to target in 2.6 seconds. During those precious moments, 23 hardened warriors held their collective breath, their eyes straining to see across nearly 3 kilometers of shimmering desert heat. Through the spotting scopes, Captain Thompson watched the impossible unfold. The candle flame simply vanished, extinguished as cleanly as if someone had leaned over and blown it out. The wax remained undisturbed, the wick still glowing cherry red from the heat of combustion. The shot had been so precise that it had displaced just enough air to snuff the flame without damaging anything else. "Holy Mother of God," Thompson's voice crackled over the radio, professional composure cracking for the first time in his military career. "Confirm clean hit. Candle is extinguished. Repeat, candle is extinguished. Target structure shows no visible damage." The silence that followed was deeper than the desert's natural quiet. It was the silence of men confronting the limits of their own understanding, of warriors recognizing a level of skill that transcended their experience. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face bearing an expression of grudging respect mixed with something approaching awe. "Sergeant Volkov," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command authority earned through decades of combat leadership. "I owe you an apology. We all do." Zara remained in position behind the rifle, cycling the bolt to eject the spent cartridge case. The brass casing arced through the air, glinting in the afternoon sunlight before landing in the sand with a soft metallic chime. She didn't speak immediately, allowing the moment to settle like dust after an explosion. "Permission to speak freely, sir." Her voice carried a slight accent, the ghost of Russian consonants that softened the hard edges of military English. Morrison nodded, his curiosity overcoming his instinct for military protocol. "The bet was never about whether I could make the shot," Zara said, finally rising from her firing position with fluid grace. "It was about whether you were ready to see past your assumptions." She handed the rifle to Martinez, who accepted it with the reverence normally reserved for religious artifacts. The weapon was still warm from the shot, its metal surfaces radiating heat absorbed from both the firing and the desert sun. "My grandfather used to say that a sniper's greatest enemy isn't distance or wind or even the target," she continued, her eyes meeting each man's gaze in turn. "It's the person who decides what's possible before the trigger is ever pulled." Private O'Brien stepped forward, reaching into his pocket to extract a crumpled wad of bills. The betting money had grown throughout the afternoon as word spread through the compound. What had started as a $1,000 wager had ballooned into nearly 3,000 as more soldiers added their own contributions to the pool. "Ma'am, I believe this belongs to you," he said, offering the money with the formal respect normally reserved for superior officers. Zara looked at the cash for a long moment, then shook her head. "Keep it. Use it for the unit fund. But next time you want to test someone's capabilities, try asking about their qualifications first." The suggestion carried no malice, only the gentle correction of someone who had spent her career proving herself in environments where failure meant death. Martinez found himself studying her with new interest, noting details he had missed during the initial briefing. The way she moved with economic precision, never wasting motion or energy. How her eyes constantly scanned the environment, cataloging potential threats and advantages with unconscious efficiency. "Sergeant, if you don't mind me asking," Martinez said, "where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" The question hung in the desert air like smoke from the rifle's muzzle. Zara's expression shifted subtly, revealing glimpses of memories filed away in the classified sections of her mind. Her service record was surprisingly thin for someone with her apparent capabilities: routine deployments, standard commendations, nothing that suggested the level of skill she had just demonstrated. "Chechnya," she said simply. "3 tour with Russian Spetsnaz before I immigrated. My grandfather taught me on hunting trips in Siberia when I was 12. The army just gave me better equipment and more challenging targets." The revelation struck the assembled soldiers like a physical blow. Russian special forces were legendary for their ruthless efficiency and extreme training methods. Chechnya had been a proving ground where survival depended on skills that couldn't be taught in any Western military academy. The fact that Zara had not only survived, but excelled in that environment explained everything about her capabilities. Morrison felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Her transfer request had come through unusual channels, routed through intelligence agencies rather than standard military personnel commands. Someone very high up the chain of command had specifically requested her assignment to Delta Force, and now he understood why. "How many confirmed kills?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer would be classified above his clearance level. Zara's smile was subtle, enigmatic, enough to know that taking life should never become easy, no matter how necessary it might be. The philosophical weight of her response settled over the group like evening shadows. These were men who had faced the moral complexities of warfare, who understood that survival sometimes required actions that haunted dreams for decades afterward. Her words carried the authority of someone who had walked that path and emerged with her humanity intact. Captain Thompson climbed down from the observation tower, his spotting scopes and range-finding equipment slung across his shoulder like the tools of a craftsman. His face bore the expression of someone who had witnessed history in the making, a moment that would be discussed in sniper schools and special operations training facilities for generations to come. "Ma'am, I've been calling shots for 15 years, he said, his voice heavy with professional respect. "I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. That wasn't just marksmanship, that was artistry." The comparison wasn't hyperbole. In the world of precision shooting, there existed a level beyond mere technical proficiency, where human skill transcended the limitations of equipment and physics. Master craftsmen in any field recognized when they encountered work that operated on a plane beyond their own understanding. Zara Volkov had just provided a master class in capabilities that existed at the intersection of training, intuition, and something approaching the mystical. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the desert compound, the group began to disperse. Equipment needed to be cleaned and secured, ranges needed to be policed, and reports needed to be written. But the memory of what they had witnessed would remain with each man for the rest of his life. Sergeant Rodriguez approached Zara as she was cleaning her rifle, the routine maintenance performed with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated during the shot. The explosive expert had spent her career working with devices that demanded absolute accuracy, where millimeter measurements meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "I heard through the grapevine that you're being considered for a special assignment," Rodriguez said, her voice pitched low to avoid attracting attention from the other soldiers. "Something involving precision work in urban environments." Zara's hands never paused in their cleaning routine, but her eyes sharpened with interest. Special assignments in urban environments typically meant one thing: high-value target elimination in populated areas where collateral damage was unacceptable. The kind of work that required not just exceptional marksmanship, but the psychological fortitude to operate under extreme pressure while maintaining absolute precision. "And what makes you think I'd be interested in something like that?" Zara asked, though her tone suggested she was already intrigued by the possibility. "Because soldiers like you don't transfer to Delta Force to run training exercises," Rodriguez replied. "You're here because someone upstairs has a problem that requires a very specific solution. And after what I just witnessed, I'm thinking that problem involves making something disappear from a very long distance away." The observation was accurate, though Rodriguez couldn't have known the full extent of the situation. Classified intelligence reports had identified a terrorist cell operating in a major European city, led by an individual whose elimination required surgical precision. Traditional military operations were impossible due to the urban environment and civilian population density. What was needed was a single shot from an impossible distance, delivered with the kind of accuracy that existed only in theoretical discussions among ballistics experts. Zara finished cleaning her rifle and began reassembling it with practiced efficiency. Each component fit together with mechanical precision, the weapon returning to its lethal configuration under her skilled hands. The process was meditative, a ritual that connected her to the long tradition of craftsmen who had perfected their tools through countless hours of dedicated practice. "My grandfather always said that a rifle was like a musical instrument," she said, sliding the bolt carrier group into position with a satisfying click. "In the hands of an amateur, it makes noise. In the hands of a master, it creates art." The philosophical observation resonated with Rodriguez, who understood the comparison on a visceral level. Explosives required the same delicate balance between science and intuition, the same understanding that precision was not just about technical specifications, but about developing an almost mystical connection with one's tools. As darkness settled over the Nevada desert, the compound took on a different character. Floodlights illuminated the main areas, but beyond their reach, the landscape dissolved into shadows and starlight. It was during these quiet evening hours that soldiers often reflected on the day's events, processing experiences that would become part of their personal mythology. In his office, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison sat before a secure computer terminal, composing a classified report that would travel through encrypted channels to the highest levels of military command. The document would be read by generals and intelligence directors, men and women who made decisions that shaped global security policy. His words would carry weight in discussions that might determine the fate of nations. "Subject demonstrates exceptional capabilities beyond standard special operations parameters," he typed, choosing each word carefully. "Recommend immediate clearance for Tier 1 operations requiring extreme precision under adverse conditions. Request expedited psychological evaluation and advanced mission briefing." The report was necessarily vague, couched in military terminology that would convey the essential information while maintaining operational security. But Morrison knew that the recipients would understand the implications. Zara Volkov represented a strategic asset of unprecedented value, a weapon system disguised as a human being. In her quarters, Zara sat on her narrow bunk, examining a photograph that had traveled with her through 3 combat deployments. The image showed an elderly man in a Soviet Army uniform, his chest covered with decorations earned during the Great Patriotic War. Anatoly Volkov had been a legend among Russian snipers, credited with over 400 confirmed kills during the siege of Leningrad. "I hope I made you proud today, Dedushka," she whispered to the photograph, using the Russian term of endearment for grandfather. The old man's eyes seemed to twinkle with approval, as if his spirit had been present during the afternoon's demonstration. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself in the brotherhood of warriors who had accepted her based on capability rather than preconceptions. The shot had been about more than marksmanship. It had been about earning the respect that would allow her to function effectively within the unit's culture. But tonight, as the desert wind whispered through the compound structures, Zara allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had accomplished something that would be remembered, that would become part of the mythology that surrounded the world's most elite soldiers. The candle had been extinguished, but her reputation had been ignited. In the armory, Martinez secured the Barrett rifle in its designated storage location, but his mind remained focused on the afternoon's events. 30 years of military service had taught him to recognize soldiers who possessed that indefinable quality that separated the exceptional from the merely competent. Zara Volkov belonged to that rare category of warriors who rewrote the rules simply by demonstrating what was possible. The bet had been settled, but the real test was just beginning. Delta Force operations didn't involve shooting candles at extreme range. They involved eliminating threats to national security under conditions where failure meant the loss of innocent lives. The skills Zara had demonstrated would soon be applied in environments where precision was measured not in millimeters, but in the difference between mission success and international catastrophe. As the Nevada night deepened and the compound settled into the quiet rhythm of military routine, 23 hardened warriors carried with them the memory of witnessing the impossible made real. The woman they had initially dismissed as another diversity hire had revealed herself to be something far more dangerous, a master craftsman disguised as an ordinary soldier. The candle at 2,575 meters had been extinguished, but Zara Ghost, Volkov's legend, was just beginning to burn. In the classified world of special operations, word would spread through secure channels and whispered conversations. A new variable had entered the equation of global security, and her name would soon be spoken with the reverence reserved for weapons that could change the course of history with a single precisely placed shot. The desert wind carried away the smoke from the afternoon's demonstration, but the impact of what had occurred would resonate through the military community for years to come. Sometimes the most profound changes began with the simplest actions, like betting $1,000 that someone couldn't hold a gun, then watching in stunned silence as they redefined the boundaries of human capability.